We are in a dimensional state right now that is like a baby stepping. I believe with my whole being that we are in a transformational state right this moment.
I want to see the whole picture. This is one little puzzle piece that wants to see the whole picture, and I guess I have to rise above myself in order to do that.
We're in a time right now where we're in an accelerated learning program. It's a universal, cosmic accelerated learning program, and there are a lot of different catalysts that are being made available to each of us at whatever level we're at.
Everyone is on a journey of some sort. Everyone has questions about the meaning of life, and we listen whenever a small part of this quest is traveled and revealed. In this program, Bob FRISSELL describes the events that led to the writing of his underground classic, Nothing in This Book is True, but It's Exactly How Things Are. You'll learn how Bob FRISSELL reached a turning point after 12 years of emotional body training. These 12 years, eerily paralleling the same 12 years ancient Egyptians took to learn the lessons of mystery schools. How he transformed that information as a modern instructor guide to teach the knowledge of the Great Pyramids. Here is his story, his journey, and though his quest is unlike most you have ever heard, in many ways, it's just like yours and mine.
A lot of things have happened in my life. I was a product of the 1960s, and the 60s changed my life in a way that it was obvious it would never be the same. You know, it's the sort of thing like you can't go back even if you want to. And in fact, I didn't want to. I was born in the middle of nowhere. Warren, Minnesota is a small town, a little dot on the map in northern Minnesota. Grew up in North Dakota, went to high school and to college in Fargo, North Dakota. So I graduated from North Dakota State University. And 1965 was a real key year. If you remember your history, that's when Vietnam was heating up. And it's like it just all of a sudden began to turn on. I would probably still be totally asleep today had not push come to shove. I decided real early I was not going to Vietnam. I was not in any way going to participate in that. I didn't buy at all the notion, the cover story that we're there to stop the spread of communism and all the rest of that. What I saw was something quite different. And that was really the beginning. I remember 2-3 years later, it was about 67 to 69, coming back to Fargo. The polarization at that point was just so clear and so obvious that just 2 or 3 years prior to that, friends of mine now who had become Air Force officers and were over there flying the planes that were dropping the bombs, meeting with them and their families, their wives, and it was just total alienation, total separation. The line was clearly drawn. Of course they felt they were doing the right thing, and of course I felt I was doing the right thing. So here you had situations where just prior to this you were very close friends, and now you can't even speak to each other. You can't even look at each other. So that was a very, very powerful and defining moment in my life. And it set a lot of wheels in motion. I took a major step moving from the Midwest to California. So it really felt like coming to the Bay Area was the thing to do at that time, and it was a major, major move. I think culture shock is the word I used at the time to describe the change.
It's not how long you make it, it's how you make it long.
In about 1971 or 1972, I became interested for totally weird reasons in clearing my head out a little bit. And what I really wanted to do was be the best bowler I could be. Well, if you want to be good at anything, you have to have your mind calm. You have to have your head clear so you can make a pressure shot. That led me to meditation. And it helped a lot in my bowling game, by the way. But there was something else going on that really hadn't begun to take form yet. Amongst other things, I discovered an author by the name of Alan Watts. He just has an eloquent, beautiful way of saying it all. It just struck me. Of course, it struck me intuitively.
Now, as far as I can see, the basic mistake is that we've invented this wonderful system of language and calculation, and that it is at once too simple to deal with the complexity of the world, and also we are liable to confuse that system of symbols with the world itself, just as we confuse, say, money with wealth.
Looking back on it now, it very much was the beginning process of waking up the right side of my brain, the intuitive side. It's probably the first memory I have of how totally in my left brain or logical side I was. And of course I was trying for the most part to understand this logically. It's all I knew. But what was leading me and kept me going into it was the intuitive, the emotional side of my brain. Shortly thereafter, I discovered this process called rebirthing. Rebirthing is primarily emotional body clearing. It teaches you how to breathe energy in a way that facilitates an internal house cleaning process. The energy I'm speaking of specifically is life force energy, or prana. In 1980, I decided that I was going to spend some time with Leonard Orr, who is the founder of Rebirthing. I did spend time with him, and I learned to become a professional rebirther and workshop leader. I've been doing that ever since. After doing that for about 10 or 11 or about 12 years, I started to notice that in spite of all the incredible things that I had learned and was practicing, there was something missing. It's this burning desire I had that increasingly this feeling that something was missing was happening in my life, to the point to where it just wouldn't go away. You know, I couldn't avoid it, I couldn't deny it, I couldn't dig a hole deep enough to bury it. It just became the dominating feeling, the dominating thought in my life, and probably more than anything, I wanted to find out just what this missing information was. And you've got to understand, I had no idea that it would be ETs or UFOs or any of this stuff. It's the last thing I would have thought about, which is really great, because that theme has reoccurred throughout all of this. It's like the last thing in my mind is what's continually happened over and over, including making this video. Obviously, this is just a partial picture. And specifically, it's not only a partial picture, but it's also very frightening information. And so if that's all you have, it can be a bit unsettling. And my life in that time frame, you know, we're talking 10 to 12 years, it definitely was somewhat unsettled. I was clearly left with the impression that even though I don't have the full picture here, obviously, this is not normal, that we're out of normalcy. And this is no longer the 50s, this is no longer Ozzie and Harriet, but there's something else going on here. And I really didn't know what. I had had almost 12 years exactly of emotional body training when I started finding the missing information. Well, that's an exact parallel to ancient Egypt, in that there was a 12-year training, spending a year in each of the temples, going through and clearing out fears and limitations, i.e. emotional body training, which is exactly what I was doing. And of course, that was the prerequisite for the missing information. Definitely the first piece of information that came to me, the first indicator that these may be less than normal times, was the whole earth change scenario, the whole prophecy thing. Now, for those of us who live in California, we put up with earthquakes, Thank goodness we don't seem to have too many tornadoes. But we do have just about everything else. In the summertime, we have fires. And I can remember times in California where it seemed like the whole state was about to burn down. And in the wintertime, we have floods and we have mudslides. When you're talking about earth changes, you're talking about earthquakes that are off the scale. Earthquakes that you just can't imagine. Ultimately, we're talking about entire continents going up and down. There is something going on a global scale. I was in part tuned into it. I was tuned into the idea of what we were doing to the environment, that in fact we had not been very conscious and very careful caretakers of planet Earth. And I was aware of certain prophecies out. Some had been out for a long, long time. Nostradamus for centuries. A master by the name of Babaji was talking about this sort of thing. Edgar Cayce was talking about it. The Hopi Indians were talking about it.
There will come a time of much destruction. This is the time. There will be paths in the sky. There will be cobwebs in the air. A gourd full of ashes will be invented, which, if dropped from the sky, would boil the oceans and burn the land.
My sense of the Hopi prophecy is that it's similar to a Chinese proverb. The one that says, if we don't change our direction, we're liable to end up where we're headed. It's like we've gone along thinking that we're separate from the earth and that we're able to control it or conquer it, standing apart from nature, trying to conquer it. It just doesn't work. Because as I see it, the earth is a living body. Just as our bodies are alive, the planet's body is alive also. There was what you might call this interdimensional master called Babaji, who was giving some very dreary predictions for the future of humanity and for the future of life on our planet. He is an immortal yogi master, so advanced that he's able to create a body for himself just like that anytime he wants. Usually, he just hangs out in a village as a simple peasant, to the point to where most of the people in the village don't even know who he is. One day in 1970, this 18-year-old just appeared outside of a cave, and it was Babaji. Evidently, he had manifested the body of an 18-year-old in this cave, just walked out and made himself available, claimed his ashram, in fact, even proved that he was, I think, something well over 100 years old, and that the ashram really was his. And for 14 years, like I say, he did make himself available to the public. My life sort of got back to normal for the next few years. And at one point in 1986, I discovered this person, Ramtha. Ramtha allegedly is an ascended master who was channeled through this woman by the name of J.Z. Knight. And at one point, Ramtha came out with this video. It was about 8 hours in length. The name of the video was Changes, and guess what this video was about? It was about earth changes.
The world is getting ready for its new change. The plates are being formed in your ocean floor, and they are moving according to that which is called the polar pools, the magnetic fields. And at the present moment, there is enough plates that have been created at the bottom of your sea that is now moving towards your coastline, which is putting pressure on the zipper, and as a result, that which is termed the land masses of what is called your Pacific coast is now in a movement thrusting north.
Ramtha had 8 hours to talk about this, and he got very, very specific about when and how this was going to happen, And if you were in a particular part, it's okay, it's going to be safe to be here, and it's not going to be safe to be here.
So if can you not move to the Western sphere, it is imperative, I urge you, to move out of your cities and seek you a place that has nigh land. And if the land is only large enough to support an elaborate lawn and flowers, dig it up and plant food.
And Ramtha was saying it was going to be happening soon. Just why are we reaching maximums on any kind of level you can think of right now? Just what is it that's going on, and why is it happening now? There's a couple motions that we need to understand regarding the planet Earth itself. Some of the obvious motions we know of are the Earth turning on its axis, so we have night and day and we have seasons. But there's another motion that I'm particularly interested in right now and explaining. Over the course of about 25,920 years, roughly 26,000 years, because the Earth sits at about 23.5 degrees of tilt at the axis, the North Pole traces an ellipse. And at one point on this ellipse, we are closest to the center of the galaxy. At one point on this ellipse, we are furthest away from the center of the galaxy. This motion, or this wobble in the Earth, is referred to as the precession of the equinoxes. But what the ancients noticed, again, mainly the Hindus and the Tibetans, is that it's not these 2 points that are necessarily the points where major changes happen, but rather there are points about 900 years on either side of these extreme points where changes do happen. As we move away from the center of the galaxy, we as a planet fall asleep. As we turn the corner and start moving towards the center of the galaxy again, we as a planet start to wake up. Every 13,000 years, we come to these points where major changes occur. Where we are right now is right here. We are sitting right on the point when major planetary changes occur. The reason the prophets are talking about it happening right now is because the 1990s is exactly at that point in this 12,500-year cycle where these changes happen. Sometime, I think back around in the 1930s, Edgar Cayce prophesied that the poles would shift, and that Nostradamus was talking about similar things way before that. And in more current times, there's an individual by the name of Gordon Michael Scallion. He publishes a monthly newsletter. It's called the Earth Changes Report. According to Scallion, if you live in California, and unless you know how to swim real well, it's not a real good place to be right about now. He has drawn a future map of the United States that looks a little bit different from the one we're used to. On his map, Denver is the new West Coast seaport. And California is at best nothing but a series of islands. So like I say, you better practice up on your swimming. This is at a time where Scallion had a 87% what you might call success rating. He predicted, for example, the Loma Prieta quake that we had here in the Bay Area of October of 1989. He talked about in June, I believe, of 1992, how there was going to be a 7.4 quake in Southern California. It happened, just like he said. It was called the Landers quake. Also, the San Francisco Chronicle reported on the fracturing of California, how these 2 earthquakes were the first stage in what you might call the fracturing off of California. So when it made the mainstream newspaper, I really began to take it seriously. When we're talking about pole shifts, we're talking about surface winds in the neighborhood of 1,000 miles an hour, continents moving to the tune of 1,000 to 2,000 miles an hour. Major, major stuff. And furthermore, scientists know that this sort of thing happens on a regular basis, just like clockwork, every 12,500 to 13,000 years. If you would have asked the scientific community as little as 30, 40, or 50 years ago about pole shifts, they probably would have laughed at you and said, that might happen once in a million years, but certainly not in our lifetime. But then it's been researched a little bit more. There's a couple theories around pole shifts as to why they happen. One has to do with the idea of the ice becoming so deep and so thick at the poles, and also forming off balance, that at a certain point it just breaks off and starts moving towards the equator at about 1,700 miles an hour. And if you look at Antarctica right now, in some places in Antarctica, the ice is 3 miles thick. Furthermore, underneath this 3 miles of ice, there's active volcanoes. The active volcanoes are not only spewing out lava, but also water. And when you put this all together, it's actually happening. There's another theory, a more modern theory. It's called magnohydrodynamics, MHD for short. There's two different types of layers of rock on the surface, and then also layers of rock just beneath the surface of the Earth that under normal conditions are solid. But under very specific conditions, it becomes a liquid. The specific conditions are if the magnetic field goes away, which is exactly what happens for 3.5 days when the poles shift. And this has been demonstrated in the laboratory. And this is fact, not fiction. The second indicator was in January of 1991. In January of 1991, I was up at Campbell Hot Springs. This is Leonard Orr's rebirthing center. And I was leading a week-long rebirthing training. I remember on Thursday of that week, I went down to the lunchroom. And phase 2 hit me squarely right between the eyes. I picked up some information. It was a Xerox copy of a book. It was entitled Spacegate, The Veil Removed. And it was talking in no uncertain terms about the alien equation and about our government's interaction and involvement with it, and of course a cover-up that is higher than top secret. And very soon I realized, oh no, here we go again. That I realized my life will never be the same as a result of interacting with this information, and that's that. This changed everything. I later found out that this information was put out by a person by the name of Doug, and I had seen Doug and just sort of said hi to him in passing, but never anything more than that. But when I found out that he was the source of this information, I couldn't wait to talk to him. After the seminar was over, almost magically, here was Doug standing right exactly outside the seminar door. He's the first person I saw when I left the room. And so I cornered him and spent the next probably 3 or 4 hours. It just went on and on and on and on. And furthermore, this is January, and we were standing in a room that was unheated. It was freezing in there. But the information, it was just so phenomenal, so spectacular, that I just couldn't let this guy go. And it was so convenient because he wanted to talk just as much as I wanted to listen and ask him questions. So we just went on for 3 or 4 hours. He gave me a bunch of information. I stayed up most of the night reading it. And the next day, he had videos, just one after another. It was better than when you were a kid on Saturday afternoon and go spend the day in the movies. We spent the day watching one video after another. It's like I couldn't get enough. The whole issue of extraterrestrials on the planet, for me, is something I'd never really thought about. Sure, I watched Star Trek, but, you know, I had never really taken it out of the realm of science fiction. This information was talking about a specific group of extraterrestrials, commonly known as the Greys. These little guys that are about 3.5 to 4 feet tall. They have the big bug eyes and the gray skin. They were abducting humans, large numbers of humans, and doing some pretty weird experiments on them. And the next whammy is we've got a whole secret aspect of our government that, of course, we're not supposed to know about, that is in cahoots with these guys. There's underground bases, and there's just all this stuff going on. Are you kidding me? Of all the information I saw, there is one video that really said it all. It was about a 2-hour video. It was put together by a TV station in Las Vegas by an individual by the name of George Knapp. It must have averaged about 10 minutes a day on the news broadcast. They would cover varying aspects of the whole UFO situation. It began with the question, is ufology getting a fair treatment? Is it getting a fair shake? And I think that's a pretty obvious no. They went on from there to talk about the Billy Meyer case and about the Roswell incident. They went on from there to talk about Area 51 and about the government cover-up. I must have had about a 10th or 12th generation copy. I mean, you can barely see it in some places. But to me, it's like the information was so great that you just figure out a way to see it anyway. Parts of it were actually fairly good. You know, you could pretty much make out 3/4 of the information at least and sort of fill in the blanks the other way. But to me, the most interesting aspect of that is that unless a video is really good, nobody's going to bother to have a 10th generation copy. And so this was passed on from generation to generation to generation. Why? Because the information is so remarkable. I mean, it sounds kind of weird in a way, but to me, that's kind of like the best aspect of all of this. Give me a multi-generation copy, because I know the information is going to be great. So again, it would have been all too easy to dismiss this information. You know, some science fiction writer had just taken it one step too far, something like that. But I didn't. As a result of all the emotional body training I had had, via rebirthing and earth changes and that sort of thing, one of the things I had noticed for sure is that I had a greatly expanded sense of intuition. And I had learned very much to trust this intuition. And my intuition was telling me, hey, there's something to this. And so I noticed that and I trusted it. I remember specifically driving back from Campbell Hot Springs from the very time when the information first started coming to me, the first phase of the information, and seeing all these cars on the freeway. It seemed like just about every one of them had their flag waving. I had come to the conclusion that along about early in 1991, that it was really our last chance that we as a planet, through some sort of a miracle, could somehow get it together and wake up and realize what we've been doing to the planet for all these eons, for all these years. To me, it would have taken an incredible miracle if somehow, some way, people could have banded together and just come into that sort of realization, that just sort of a form of unity, and literally taken a 180-degree about face and started just completely changing our ways. But if you remember back to that time, what did we do instead? That's when we physically attacked Iraq, and the oil fields got set on fire, and all the rest of that just senseless mayhem. In other words, the exact opposite of what I myself was seeing had to be done. So not only were we physically attacking Iraq and setting the oil fields on fire and just devastating that area of the planet, but we were in almost unanimous agreement that it was the right thing to do. I wanted more than anything to get the complete picture, the answer to what is it that's going on here. And that came to me in June of 1992 when I discovered via video this person named Drunvalo Melchizedek. One day I got a letter in the mail. It wasn't just any letter, it was a letter from a group that I'd been hanging out with a little bit, a group of like-minded people that were looking at the very same questions I was looking at. So I got this letter in the mail talking about this individual by the name of Drunvalo Melchizedek. Now that's the first thing that struck me. You know, that's not your everyday normal type name. But I read the letter, and what struck me was a couple of key points. First of all, it was talking about a person by the name of Thoth. And they talked about Thoth as a person who had been around, alive, and in a body for 52,000 years. Now, you might think, well, that's really weird. You can't do that. But that didn't strike me as weird at all, because that's exactly the sort of thing that we were talking about and looking at in rebirthing. The question of how do you keep your body beyond the normal lifespan. Thoth is this ascended master. He was the king of Atlantis for 16,000 years. He, in Egypt, was known as the scribe. He's just this incredible, loving, ascended master. And so they were talking about that in the context of ascension. Well, ascension is the ability to turn your body into a ball of light and disappear and reappear into literally a different dimensional reality. This was being presented by this individual named Drunvalo Melchizedek on video. And they talked about, I think, 30 to 32 hours of this workshop called the Flower of Life Workshop. And I just decided right then and there, yeah, I have to go. I have to go check this guy out. He comes from a level of consciousness that is so far beyond ours that it's really almost impossible to imagine. It's a level of consciousness called Melchizedek. A Melchizedek is anyone who is able to travel through all 144 different dimensional worlds in our octave. Dimensional worlds are separated in exactly the same way as notes are on a musical scale. If you take any octave on a keyboard, you've got 8 notes, and the 8th note is actually the return note or the first note of the next octave. But you also have 5 black keys on any octave, and when you add it all up, you've got 12 notes of the chromatic scale, which is what we have here. And just as in music, you have overtones in between each dimension. In universal terms, in dimensional terms, there are 12 harmonic overtones in between each of the major dimensions. Each of these overtones in each of these major dimensions is a universe just as vast as this one. The reason one note sounds different from another note is because of wavelength. As you go up in the octave, the wavelength becomes shorter. As you go down, the wavelength becomes longer, and the same is true for dimensional worlds. There's other worlds, and they're all right here. And when I say right here, I mean exactly that. They're in this room. And you might ask, well, if they're in this room, why aren't we experiencing them? The answer to that is that we don't know how to tune to them. If you have a radio or a TV set, and if you have one station on, it doesn't mean that the other stations aren't there. It just means that you're not getting it because you haven't tuned to it. So 12 times 12 gives you 144 different dimensions or different worlds in any octave. A Melchizedek is anyone who is able to travel through all 144 different worlds and remain stable and conscious. So that's what Drunvalo is.
We exist, we literally exist on other worlds besides here. Right now, your consciousness has been severed from yourself, your higher aspect. And so you're only aware of just what's going on here. But that is not the norm. The norm in the world is people are aware of many different levels simultaneously.
After roughly a 70-year lifespan, we die, and our spirit goes to the third overtone of the fourth dimension. It hangs out there for a while, and when the time is right, via reincarnation, it comes back and grabs another body and goes through the birth-death process again. But the thing is that when we're here, we have no recollection of having been there. When we're there, we have no recollection of having been here. So in many ways, it's just going around and around and around like a rat chasing its tail and essentially getting nowhere. There are two alternatives. Each is a function of consciousness. The first alternative is known as resurrection. In resurrection, you do die, but you do it in a way that enables you to reform your light body on the other side, and you don't stop at the third overtone of the fourth dimension. You keep going until you hit either the 10th, 11th, or 12th overtone of the fourth dimension. And when you do, you reform your light body on that side, and the real key is that you retain your memory. Thoth went through a process 52,000 years ago that enabled him to keep his memory, not only for 52,000 years, but forever. He will never again have a break in memory. He did not go through resurrection. He went through something called ascension. Now, ascension is even better yet, because when you ascend, you don't die at all. You just know at that point how to turn your body into a ball of light and disappear out of this world and reappear into whatever world you have tuned to. And in this case, that again would be the 10th, 11th, or 12th overtones of the fourth dimension. The key to understanding ascension is the Merkaba. The Merkaba is the universal pattern of creation. Literally, it's everything. There's nothing it isn't. But included in what it is a vehicle of ascension. The basis for understanding the Merkaba is a geometrical image known as a star tetrahedron. A star tetrahedron is two inverted tetrahedrons. A tetrahedron being the simplest of the 5 Platonic solids. So when you invert two tetrahedrons in this exact specific manner, you have this figure known as a star tetrahedron. We all have this geometrical shape around our body. It's a crystalline field, it's electromagnetic in nature. We not only have one of them, we have 3 of them, literally superimposed over each other. One is the mental body, one is the physical body, and one is the emotional body. So when you know how to turn these fields on, you get the mental body rotating to the left, up to 9/10 the speed of light. You also get the other one rotating to the right, the intuitive body, and the physical one stays put. So when these fields are turned on, counter-rotating fields, you have the activated Merkaba field. We all have that potential, and it's all a function of consciousness. Through the combined use of breathing in a certain way and using both sides of the mind, using the left brain, the logical understanding, and using the right brain, the intuitive understanding. Using all 3 of those components together gives us the potential for activating these Merkaba fields. When the Merkaba field is activated, you have a vehicle of ascension. You have to be able to feel your intimate connection to all life everywhere in order for the Merkaba to become a living possibility. That, combined with breathing in a certain way, creates this possibility. The significance of 12 years of emotional body training is that that is exactly what they were doing in ancient Egypt. There was a 12-year school, a 12-year Egyptian mystery school, if you will, that focused on emotional body clearing. The training was called the left eye of Horus. The left eye because the left eye is controlled by the right brain. It's the side of the mind or the brain that sees life intuitively. This is what was going on in Egypt. And I had 12 years exactly of emotional body training when the missing information began to, like I say, magically appear to me. So I was recreating unknowingly what was going on in ancient Egypt. There's 12 temples, 12 major temples in Egypt along the Nile. The initiate would spend about a year in each of these temples, learning how to move through fears and limitations associated with each of the 12 major chakras. There's one specific training that the initiate would go through in the left eye of Horus training in the temple known as Kamumbu. The initiate would stand in front. There would be a wall right in front of him, and then there would be 3 steps leading down into water, and it was dark. They couldn't see any further than the 3 steps. So the initiate was told only one thing, that is to go into the water and to find a different way to come out. That's all they were told. It was, again, dark, and it was deep. It was about 25 feet deep. After they carefully went through and came into an opening, they could see that there was a tank now that was lit. When they got into this tank, they also saw that they had company. There were crocodiles in that tank. And remember, the instructions are to find a different way out. Well, looking through the crocodiles, what they could see is that up at the top here, there was a way out. When they came to the top, they were told by the instructor, oh, by the way, you just failed. That was not the way out. So failure meant that they had to go through a lot more training. Then when it was thought, after much more training, that they were ready, they went back into the tank again. Now, this time they knew there were crocodiles. So, you know, in a way, you would think that makes it almost worse. In the moment of their greatest fear, they had to go deeper until they found the correct way out. So, to me, this just perfectly illustrates the whole concept of emotional body clearing. If you can allow yourself to have a thorough experience of something that you would otherwise tend to avoid or to resist, what happens is you move through it. In this specific instant, the fears integrate. So that by the end of 12 years of training, these guys were fearless. I mean, nothing bothered them. There was a person by the name of Akhenaten who came along and taught what was referred to as the missing information. Around 1355 BC, he taught the 12-year mystery school. The mystery school was known as Akhenaten's Mystery School, the Law of One. The symbol for the school was the right eye of Horus. This was left brain information, the male side, the logical side of how the entire universe is created by spirit and nothing. Akhenaten was a very special person who was brought here by the Ascended Masters to solve a specific problem. The problem being that as Egypt developed, they lost completely the concept of one spirit moving through everything. And they started worshiping all these different gods. He's not from here. He was from the star system of Sirius, and on the star system of Sirius, the height ranges from 10 to 16 feet. This is a whole different level of consciousness, what we would refer to as a very high level of unity consciousness or Christ consciousness. So Akhenaten was brought here as an example of the level of consciousness that we are moving into. The polarity situation we're in, that we see everything divided, it's either good or bad, right or wrong, we forget that there's a unifying thread that moves through everything. We don't see that. We only see polarization. Well, the problem really is not with the right brain, the feminine, the intuitive component, because even though it can't prove anything, it pretty much is able to feel its way to the reality, through the reality, to the understanding on an intuitive level that everything is interconnected, that there is no separation. So there's really not a problem on that side. The problem, when we split ourselves into left and right brain, is with the male side, the logical side. Because it looks out there and it sees everything divided. It will stay separate, it will stay divided forever until it can be shown. And the only way it can be shown is step by step and logically that everything is totally, completely interconnected. This is what Akhenaten was teaching in his 12-year school. After 12 years of the emotional body training, the left eye of Horus, and then after 12 years of Akhenaten's training, the initiate then went into the Great Pyramid for a 3.5-day experience. This is what the Great Pyramid was for. It was an initiation chamber designed to synthetically create the experience of Christ consciousness. So it happened in 3 separate phases. The first phase was in a tunnel actually underneath the Great Pyramid. It's a tunnel that looks like it ends right in the middle of nowhere, like they just got tired of digging and just all of a sudden stopped, or like they didn't know what they were doing. They knew exactly what they were doing. They dug that tunnel so that if you go and lie down in the correct position, your pineal gland lines up exactly with a spiraling energy known as a black light spiral that takes you literally into a place inside of the earth. It's about 1,000 miles inside the earth. It's known as the Halls of Amenti. And what you have is a 4th dimensional experience. A 4th dimensional experience is such that whatever you think, it's real, and it appears before you. So the second phase of the training in the Great Pyramid then was in the King's Chamber. The initiate would go and lie down in the sarcophagus. The lid would be placed on the sarcophagus, and when you're lying in the sarcophagus, there is another energy. It's a white light spiral that goes through the pineal gland and gives you what you might call an expanded experience, where you have the experience literally of going to the center of the universe and experiencing yourself as everything. For 3 to 3.5 days, the initiate would have this experience. And when they came back, I mean, obviously, they were never the same person again. So after having an experience like that, I think that some stabilization was in order. And that's what the Queen's Chamber was for. So after stabilizing in the Queen's Chamber, the person was never the same. What was going on then in ancient Egypt is after 24 years of training on both sides of the mind, right brain first and then left brain, the initiate was given this experience of Christ consciousness in the pyramid. Well, that's what's going on today on the planet. only, you see, in Egypt there was only a few hundred initiates who had this experience. If Drunvalo is correct with his information, the entire planet is about to have this experience. We're at the end, literally the end of a cycle, to where the planet experienced tremendous changes, physical changes and consciousness changes. What he's saying then is that we as a planet are about to ascend into a whole different way of being. It's called unity consciousness or Christ consciousness. For me, in my life, given the stages I went through, the first two stages were just partial information. And like I tried to make very, very clear, if what you have is just partial information, and especially the kind of information that I was confronted with, it can literally scare the bejeebers out of you. Because everything is a function of consciousness, it's a matter of opening up to see the complete picture. And it's not something you just do intellectually, it's a process, it's an internal process. When you allow yourself to go through that, in my case it was whether I wanted to or not. I was like in the tank with the crocodiles. You know, when I go back to June of 1992, hearing about Gordon Michael Scallion, I mean, that was just it. I was so activated, I was ready to leave the planet. And now I feel more grounded, more calm, more present than I ever would have thought possible. And it literally is a result of all the pieces coming together. We're in for some big changes. I think on just about every level, on some level anyway, people know that something is going on, that these are not normal times, but most people are not able quite to put a finger on it. So when you have the big picture to look at, you can see that something big is going on, and because it's all a function of consciousness, that's the key right there. So if we enter into the coming changes filled with fear and ignorance, then because we're creating the reality unerringly, the changes are going to be a reflection of that. If, however, we become conscious enough to move through our fears and limitations, then the changes are going to be a reflection of that. It's completely up to us. And so ultimately what that leads me to is the conclusion that the most important thing that any one of us can do to prepare for this is internal work. See, we've been giving our power away for so long that we've become convinced that the power resides out there in the form of experts. So if we want to find out about our condition, our bodily condition, for example, we have to go to an expert called a doctor. It just goes on and on and on. Our entire institutions are set up this way. We give our power away for so long to so many different people that we become convinced that nothing resides in here. Nothing could be further from the truth. We've convinced ourselves that we're human beings, occasionally having a spiritual experience. Turn that around 180 degrees. We're spiritual beings, we have everything we need, it's all contained within, and we're here in a human body. And we're here to birth the planet into a higher dimensional aspect of itself. And as we wake up and grow into that, then the birth of the planet will be a reflection of that. The story I tell of going through all these changes, moving through and integrating my fears and limitations, is exactly what I'm